Welcome. It's good to be here in circle and community with all of you. My name is Taj, and I'm not in a bamboo forest. I am in the heart of Ohlone territory, in the land called Wakanda forever, Oakland, and yeah, really excited to be in conversation with all of you about this question of decolonizing finance, which is probably the biggest oxymoron you could ever imagine, which we will get into as our partners at Movement Generation say. The practice of just transition is navigating contradictions. So if we are about the work of building a restorative and regenerative economy, an Indigenous, feminist, donut, solidarity, democratic, new, next, local, loving, living, sharing, caring economy, there's a lot of contradictions to navigate. Quite a few, all the time. So we're gonna dive into the juicy complexity of all of that, and I want to welcome my brother. Appreciate my brother David Cobb, who is a collaborator, a comrade, and co-conspirator in much of this work. And so, thank you for inviting us to be here. And brother Ruben and brother Chad, other co-conspirators here, who are gonna help us to have a little bit of a conversation. So yeah, how does the story begin? I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit of my journey, and I'm gonna invite Chad and Ruben to share a little bit about their journeys, and through that try to make some sense of this question of decolonizing finance. Yeah, so I'm a movement baby, social movement baby. So I grew up in a family in which changing the world was something that we did. It was sort of the family business, and I got into it very young. My parents used to have these big birthday parties for me when I was a kid, and they loved to tell this story about how, like, police officer showed up at the party and they looked down and they saw I was peeing on his boots. And that was like the proud story that they told of, like, my resistance to the violence of racial capitalism from a very early age. So yeah, so I got into the business legitimately and young. Became a community organizer, and got real involved in doing social movement building. Ran an organization for many years called the Movement Strategy Center. And a lot of what we did was help to incubate and curate alliances and coalitions working on, issues of climate justice and environmental justice, of economic democracy, of gender justice and gender equality. And so helping folks trying to work on those issues build coalitions and alliances to try to change the story, change the narrative, change the culture, change the worldview, and to build the kind of cultural power that would affirm the stories that come out of our traditions and cultures, and the stories that tell the truth about who we are as people, and as a part of this thriving web of life, and change the rules, change the political system and the power and the laws and the decision makers to try to create a more fair and just society. And in doing that work for many years with many communities, and communities that we were working with, and particularly around questions of the just transition, we're saying, like, if we're going to completely transition the whole global economy from a fossil fuel based economy to a renewable energy economy, like, that sounds expensive. How much is that going to cost? And where's the money going to come from to make that transition? Whether that transition is in the energy system, the food system, the way in which we provide care, medical care, all kinds of care, like, because basically in the moment that we're in, like, the transition required is comprehensive. It's required across all systems, right? And so that sort of got me going on like, okay, well, yeah, that does sound expensive. Where is the money going to come from, and how do we, get that money in the hands of the people and communities who have the solutions? And so that put me on a journey to launch this project called Full Spectrum Labs and Full Spectrum Capital Partners, which is really looking at this question of how we support communities and tribes and indigenous people and people who've been harmed by the extractive economy to reclaim our creativity, land, labor, and capital, and put those into the service of life, right? So that became a big focus. And the capital part of it, frankly, was the part that many of us were kind of nervous about and scared of, because it's kind of, for most of us, been the weapon of domination and control that's really made our lives miserable for a very long time. So the notion, as our friend Edgar wrote about in his Decolonizing Wealth book, the notion that money could be medicine and not just poison, was a notion that was just sort of very foreign to many of our nervous systems and the histories and experiences of our people, because it's been so often used as a mechanism of violence, domination, and extraction in a banks and tanks economy, right? So this notion that we could sort of reclaim capital and put it into the hands of communities was a sort of kind of a foreign concept. But we sort of jumped into it and started to try to sort of figure out how some of that might unfold. I want to sort of name two people who are really kind of instrumental in the work of our practice in that. And one is Amaka Agbo, who's sort of a real leader in the work of community wealth building and just transition, and has developed a whole framework around restorative economics, and in the context of reorganizing regenerative and restorative capital, that this notion of repair and restoration as being foundational to the work of regeneration, meaning like you build the future through the repair of the past. We can't just say, oh, from here forward, we're gonna just we're gonna create a regenerative future without asking the question, well, how did we get here? And where did the wealth that has been accumulated get accumulated? And whose land and labor was stolen in order to amass that accumulation? And perhaps if we're going to have a regenerative future, the core principle of decolonizing finance is starting with the question of how we repair the economic harm, the cultural harm, the political harm of the past that was created through these extractive processes. So the core principle of decolonize finance is this principle of acknowledgement of the harm that's been done, and a commitment to return land, return capital, return assets to the people from whom it has been violently and systematically stolen and extracted. So that's the first core element of any decolonized, restorative, regenerative financial process, is that. And Amaka's work is sort of central and for us as practitioners in understanding what that means. The other person I want to acknowledge is Auntie Pat, who's a Navajo elder who I've been in a process with, who's been in community with folks who are stewards of resources to kind of think about this question of how we do some of this decolonization work around capital. And she said something in a gathering that I was in last year that kind of really changed the way I look at everything. So one way to understand like this moment of history we're in is that like 5 to 10,000 years ago, someone had the stupidest idea ever in human history. And that idea was that human beings are separate from nature. And not just separate from nature, they are separate and superior. And that nature is female and humans are male. Separation supremacy, right? And that from that position, like humans are subjects and nature is an object. So separation supremacy, domination, extraction, separation supremacy. And then about 500 years ago, someone had the even stupider idea to say, oh, humans are not just separate and superior to nature. Humans are not just male, nature is female. Humans are white and male, and nature is black and indigenous, right? So it's the construction of race, right? The construction of whiteness against the nigger and the native. That's how it got. That's what whiteness is made of. That lie, the lie of separation supremacy, mapped onto the gender binary, right? It's a binary culture, right? So the thing that's collapsing all around us is the collapse of that worldview. The worldview of separation supremacy. Some people call that the colonial worldview. If you read Dr. Rupa's book about the colonial construct, you'll get a very particular understanding of how the colonial worldview operates. And that is what is collapsing all around us, the colonial worldview and the political and economic system built on the lie of separation, supremacy, and scarcity, right? And what is emerging out of that collapse, right? What's emerging is the wisdom and leadership of Indigenous people who have Indigenous worldview, or it's also very similar to ecological worldview, right? Or biological worldview, there, because within that worldview, everything's alive and everything's connected. There's no subject and object, right? The water has something to say. The only question is, are we listening, right? That's the wisdom of the ecological worldview. And so, as someone who's, as many of us are, in my own process of healing from my own internalized racism, of decolonizing my own consciousness and experience, right? I am guided by leaders who are helping us all to think about what it means to kind of return to the truth of reality. And so Auntie Pat is one of those people. And she said this thing to me, which kind of blew me away. She's like, what is the money saying? So I said, Auntie Pat, what do you mean, what is the money saying? She's like, what is the money saying? Like, the money is talking to us, and the money like wants something. And I said, okay, I'm learning to listen to the water. The water has something to say. I understand that that it is flowing through me. It is who I am, and I need to like listen to what the water has to say, because that is how we honor life. So that makes sense to me. But this notion that the money has something to say, I'm like, that makes no sense to me. And what I realized in what she said was like, I had reinscribed the binary of the sacred, of the subject and the object, and I had put money into the domain of object, without any spirit, without any life, without anything to say. And I will leave with you, like, I'm still trying to figure out what the money's trying to say. But what I got to is like, energy is energy, water is water, capital is energy that must flow like water. So if you understand the spirit of water, imagine that capital flowed infused with the spirit of water. What does water want to do? Water wants to go to the low places. So any of you who are fans of, sort of students of Taoism and have read the Tao Te Ching and understand that book is all about water as the most transformative and central and powerful element within the elements. Like, water is where it's at. And we study water to understand the nature of life itself, right? So what if capital flowed with the spirit of water, right? it would break open all the dams, right? Because where water stagnates, where capital stagnates, there is sickness, there is illness, there is ill-being. Where there is flow, there is life, there is creativity, there is renewal, there is regeneration, right? So we live in a Edgar Villanueva, Decolonizing Wealth. Shout out to Edgar. We live in a world where there's a lot of stagnation. There is enclosure, there is hoarding, there is of all kinds of things, right? Because separation, supremacy, scarcity, right? That's what fear, domination, control, right? If we are all connected and we're all relatives, and the well-being of a human being on the whole other side of the world is as important to me as the relationship between my heart and my lungs. And that's the truth of who I am, and that's the truth of who we are. Then we are living in interdependence, interconnection, reciprocity in such a way that like we can experience abundance, right? As Gandhi said, there is more than enough for everyone's need, but not nearly enough for a few people's greed, right? That's the reality of our existence. So part of one of the other core principles of decolonizing finance, decolonizing our relationship to capital, is understanding that if we see the truth of who we are, then we can experience abundance in flow. If we can allow the water to flow, if we can allow the capital to flow, right? There's actually more than enough for all of us to have more than what we need, right? To have a party all over the world right now, if we can just release the fear. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Now I want to pull in David and Ruben to talk about how they met, because me and Amaka and brother Aaron Tanaka from Center for Economic Democracy and Aisha Shillingford, we organized this gathering of folks working in the solidarity economy space up in Sonoma a few years ago. And you'll never guess who ended up as roommates. And I'll let you, David, describe your experience with that, and then Ruben can throw it in here, and you can yeah. So get ready.
Yeah. So thank you, Taj. It's always so brilliant to listen to you. You are my favorite coyote. I will say that. Taj is a poet as well as a strategist and a theorist and a connector, weaver par excellence. And look, I'm just going to be honest, y'all. Like, so yes, Ruben Hernandez is now my friend. I can say that. When we met at that session, it was literally on solidarity economy, and Ruben and I were paired together as bunkmates in a dorm room. And I don't know if it was done on purpose or not, or the goddess just decided to put us together. I really don't know, but I do know this. It was fantastic. Like, oh, okay, hey, how are you doing? And it was a casual, and as a human being, Ruben was absolutely charming. And then we went to breakfast and had a wonderful conversation, but it was really just kind of getting to know you, right? And then along the way, I was like, I found out dude is a like capital investor, or like, what was the word? Like a venture capitalist. And I, if you know me, self-identify as an anti-capitalist. And like I was like, I literally like, why are you even here? All right. Now I'm from the South, so I'm not, I hope I wasn't mean to you then, Ruben, but I was sort of like, what's this dude doing here? But he was so relentlessly charming and just asking very provocative, open-ended questions, and how he participated, I couldn't help but to like him. So I'm going to stop there and check in, Ruben, because I want to see how you experienced that first, say, 48 hours of our relationship, because I'm kind of embarrassed. I feel like I judged you harshly and incorrectly. I just want to say that's how I'm remembering our origin story.
I would say I'm still traumatized by that, but okay. No, but I understood where you were coming from, and like I said earlier before we actually went live, it's all part of colonizing our relationships, right? Because my role as an investor, or as the role that I have right now in the economy that I decided to take, was my way of figuring out how to decolonize our own relationships to one another, to our communities, to our brothers and sisters in indigenous places all over the world. I mean, Northern Europeans, or Europeans that colonized the Americas, they're indigenous to that land. So everyone is indigenous to somewhere, and the tools that we create and the technology or the solutions that we create as humans to just be able to live on this world are tools. So I didn't think of that encounter. You know, you were very, very vocal about being a communist, right? And it's like, okay, whatever that means. I don't really understand what you mean by that. But I just saw you as a person. And I asked Taj before I went to my room. I was like, who is this white guy that is my roommate? And Taj was like, I have no idea. And then the funny part is that I didn't want to go to my room. I ended up going like at 1 or 2 in the morning after like hanging out with Taj and the rest of the folks there. And then and apparently I snore. So so David woke up really early, and I woke up and I'm like, who am I bunking with? And I felt really bad, and I Googled him and I said, oh shoot, he ran for president for the Green Party in 2004. I'm like, oh, I guess I guess this guy is really important. And and I was when I read and I started reading about what you were trying to do, David, and just the spirit of your commitment to people was really what made me have the patience to even go again and have another conversation afterwards, because you asked for a follow-up conversation about what actually have I actually done and for Indigenous people in the continent. And so I had to like go through my whole resume of what I've done and results and outcomes, and then ended up going to Humboldt to meet with all kinds of folks in that region to share my experience as an impact investor, as a community member, as an engineer, as an entrepreneur, as a father of two, as an immigrant to this country, as to how I'm learning how to use the different tools that have been created in the past thousands of years, but specifically in the past 50 years in capital, and how we're using different tools to remake and basically heal the relationships that have been toxified by an economic system that was forced by many different actors in the different phases of our economies around the world. So that's really my reaction to that. I love you, bro. So
I love you too, Ruben. And I want to say this for real. So I've had a lot of teachers, and I'm still on a learning journey and certainly a decolonizing journey. The two men that you're looking at now, and I do want to admit that, so a lot of male bodies here, but you'll notice that we're all greatly influenced by women. But in this conversation, I just want to be transparent and name that. But these two men have helped me to rethink what money is and how to think about money in ways that very few people have really pushed me as deeply as they have. Look, I am a Marxist. I have a worldview, and I could explain what that means. But for a lot of folks, that language, I think, turns off conversation. So I'm learning to code switch, right? I'm still who I am, but I'm trying to communicate, right? And what I'm realizing is that there are some words that shut down communication rather than facilitate communication. I watch Taj, I watch Ruben, and I hope we'll hear from Chad, who I'm getting to know a little bit more very quickly. But I'm going to tell you, Taj told me, David, all right, I know what you mean when you're talking, but you're anti-capitalism because of its extraction, its domination. It's a worldview of power over. Like, that's what you're trying to communicate. But let me tell you something, pal, you're not anti-capital. And I'm going to help you to rethink how you think about it. And I don't know if you remember this, Taj, but you literally said, David, I see how you're hustling, you're trying to do this work, and you like, I watch you as a fundraiser. I am going to teach you to stop thinking about $10,000 at a time. I'm going to teach you to think about $100,000 at a time, and then $1 million at a time. And ultimately, you're going to be at $100 million at a time, because you're not trying to hoard it. I'm going to teach you a different way of thinking about it. I don't know if you remember that comment, Taj, but I do.
Yeah. So this is just a really exciting moment to be alive. And I think, at the heart of the thing that I do is called full spectrum. So every binary is a spectrum. Every spectrum is a wheel. Each wheel is a web and a spiral, except when it's not. On the road to awareness, default to complexity and paradox. Reality is fundamentally non-binary. Reality is fundamentally complex and paradoxical. That is the actual nature of actual reality. If you don't believe me, talk to a physicist and have them explain to you the nature of reality and waves and particles and all those wonderful things. Like, reality is weird. It is weird and strange in ways that we barely understand, right? We live in the colonial worldview says it's all particles, not waves. It's male, it's female, it's good, it's bad, it's right, it's wrong. It's like, it's binary, right? It's not reality, which is one of the things Indigenous cultures are helping us to remember and reclaim, because in relationship to gender, most Indigenous cultures recognize and understand that gender is not two things, it's many things, right? Like the rest of reality, it's complex. So if you live in a binary culture, and these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, and you want to be a good guy and not a bad guy, what you end up doing is putting yourself in a little tiny box, because you can't engage reality in its complexity. You're either working to stop over here the most extractive, harmful, terrible things that are happening, or you're over here trying to do something very small and utopian, which you can control, right? Because you want to control things because you want to be good. You don't want to be bad. You want to be a good guy, not a bad guy. I do not want to be good. I want to be human. I do not want the experience of controlling something that is beautiful and small. I want everyone to thrive. I want everything to change. And if I want everything to change, I have to have the courage to be, to be in relationship to everything. The things that I like, the things that I don't like, right? Because it is all me. I'm related to all of it. And I can say, oh, I like my left hand better than my right hand. Not so helpful. If my right hand gets burned in the stove, my left hand will immediately, without thought, come to its aid. That's my responsibility as a human being. If you are in distress, if you have something you need, then I should respond to you the way my right hand responds to my left. That's the truth of who I am. Can I live in the truth of that? So this smallness, right, of like, hey, let's figure out how to create a post-capitalist reality in this tiny quarter-acre lot where we're growing food on this land that we've borrowed from. No. Indigenous people should have all of their land back. All of it. Now, yesterday, period. That's my view. That's my belief. That's my commitment. right? So all of the capital that's been extracted should be returned. All of it, not 2%, 5%, 3%, right? So if you're starting from that place, right, you can't swallow the whole ocean in one, you can't do it all at once, like, but you have to actually have a strategy that's about the well-being of the whole, the well-being of this whole ecosystem, the well-being of this whole neighborhood, the well-being of this whole watershed, right? Wholeness in all of its articulations of clarity, right? The wholeness of this body, the wholeness of this circle, the wholeness of this nation, this tribe, these people, right? We need things to be well in their wholeness, right? So that's the shift in consciousness. That is some of what I am learning is required of myself, to not like make myself small in ways that are not in service of my values and my responsibilities to my relatives, right? I sell my relatives short if I make myself small, and I don't bring everything that I have in service of our collective healing, thriving, and liberation. Ruben, you are someone who I love very much, and like your journey is so interesting and important. But Ruben went to southern Chile to spend time, to go into the jungles and spend time with the Mapuche people and folks doing interesting work down there. He's like, hey, you went down there with a lot of ideas of like, I came from my homelands in Honduras and came to the US and went to Colombia, and I've got all these skills, and like I can come and help you with housing, and I can help you infrastructure, and I can like help other people. And then and then what happened? What happened? What did you learn from the traditional leaders of the Mapuche about like what you had to offer and what they had to offer, and the relative value and the value of that to all of us, and how is that informed? Because in that, I will say, like, the reason why I'm going there, because like what you learned in that relationship is core to all the things that we all do. And so I just want to see if you've got a story to share from that moment that might give some insights about what traditional Indigenous leaders who have been stewards of their territory from time immemorial, what happens when you sit down and listen humbly and move from there.
Wow. Well, shout out to Walmapu. Somebody put Walmapu there. That's yeah, that's someone who's been down there. Gosh, your questions. Well, I have to say that the Mapuche people, the way and this has been, I don't know how, really they're really challenging for me to answer this question, but is there's so much to weave here. I grew up I was born in a country that our former President Trump called a shithole, and that's Honduras. And on the history of Honduras is very much the same as many countries in the Americas, where Europeans came and basically took everything from the indigenous people. There's one indigenous leader in Honduras, part of the Lenca tribe, who are descendants of the Mayans. And his name is Lempira, which is the same as the name of the currency of Honduras, Lempira. Like, so when I migrated from Honduras to New York and went to college at Columbia University, I decided that I was going to join this, fraternity, this Hispanic Latino fraternity that's called Phi Iota Alpha. Is called the Fuerza, Integridad, Amistad. This fraternity was actually founded in 1931 by the elite Latin Americans that went to Columbia University, and sort of, the ones who became presidents and dictators and all of those beautiful characters that had dominated the history of Latin America since 1821, of the independence times in Latin America, and this fraternity kind of got it died like after the World War II, and then they try to revive this fraternity in the 90s. I was one of the founding members of the fraternity at Columbia University in 1995, and I decided to choose this name. My name was Lempira as my name for pledging this fraternity. And one of my best friends, who happened to be Chilean and also was pledging with me, who was the one who brought this to the university, he called himself Caupolicán. And Caupolicán, if you know the history of Chile, Caupolicán was one of the warrior leaders of the Mapuche people, and fought the Spanish crown. And actually, the Mapuche were the only people of the Americas, the only indigenous people that have a actual document from the Spanish crown saying that they're a sovereign nation. So the Mapuche in 1641 were the first, and I believe is the only America's tribe, that indigenous people that has had this document to prove that they were sovereign, and they were sovereign for about 300 years or 200 years, because in 1880 the Chilean government started the Chilean state started what is called the pacification of the South. Sort of that the Chileans have done this really interesting thing. They copy everything that all the bad things that the US has done, the Chileans have copied. So the western frontier of the US moving west, they went south, because that's the only space they got. They can only go south because they have the Andes, so they can't really go over the Andes. And Argentina was a whole different ball game. So going south was the thing in 1880s, and all the atrocities that the newly independent country of Chile did to the Mapuches. You can read it. You can read all of that stuff, and you can see the history of that country. But the point is that 2010, the Chilean government, the Chilean development agencies reached out to me. I was heading the Chamber of Commerce in Silicon Valley, and they reached out to me to see if we wanted to make investments in Araucanía, which is Wallmapu. Araucanía is a region of the state of Chile, in southern Chile. And that's where the majority of the indigenous people, the Mapuche people, are still living there. And they actually have a border. There's a university called the University of the Border. And that's where the sort of Patagonia starts in Chile. And they reached out and they said, would you like to invest here in renewable energy and forestry and all this, extractive industries, and then I started learning about the Mapuche. I didn't even know where Araucanía was, and I connected it back to my college years on how my friend was a Chilean, was Mapuche, named himself after a warrior of a Mapuche warrior. And I said, this is too crazy. This is a lot. So I started learning a lot more about the Mapuche culture and the Mapuche people, and the relationship between the Mapuche nation with the state of Chile. And it was a decision there that I said, we won't invest in Chile unless we get to meet our brothers and sisters of the Mapuche nation. We need to learn what they want. We need to see what they want. So we started bringing Mapuche leaders, whether they're indigenous, ancestral leaders, business leaders, entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs. We started just bringing them to Silicon Valley to supposedly learn our ways of doing business. And what I learned, so as they were coming here, they realized how we were doing business here and how money was moving in the valley, and they started inviting us to go down there to their protocol, following their protocol. And a lot of the folks that I took from the US, that I brought from the US to Chile to meet with the Mapuche and be part of that, they're not there they didn't last very long, because the way of being in relationship with other people was very different than the way that we relate to people up here in the Valley and in California. And the way I see it is, we're very transactional, very superficial, and down there is very, very relational, and it takes a long time to build a relationship of trust. And that really what got me started into understanding the relationship between Indigenous people and the planet and the earth. I started developing an investment thesis from an investment perspective that was along the line of we need to invest in Indigenous people, because if we in Indigenous people anywhere in the world, means anywhere in the world, because they understand their relationship to earth, and the relationship to the planet, and the relationship to the local water, to the local plants, to the local mountain. So if we invest more in people who have had a relationship for thousands of years with place and with nature, we're going to be more likely in getting returns, financial returns, and also be in relationship and be healthy with our relationship to the earth. So and it was really difficult at first to go down as an American, as a US person, as a venture capitalist, to understand the timing of things, and how fast or how much you have to do before you start scaling things, which is what venture capital as a vehicle. Venture capital as a financial vehicle is really good at scaling things, but is really, really bad at healing, is really, really bad at building stuff. So you can only scale what was already being healed and was already being built. You cannot scale something that is toxic. You could do that, but that's what we're getting right now. That's what we're getting a lot of venture capital going into very unwell people that are not connected to the earth. They're not connected to their families. They're not connected to their place. They're not connected to their community. And we're, as an industry, venture capital is putting a lot of money into folks who have been colonized and have been toxified by the way our economic system is run. So the Mapuche people taught me how to be respectful of that, and be respectful of the healing process that we all have to go through in our own ways. Be in relationship to Mother Nature, and be in relationship when it comes to designing any solutions. We need to be in relationship to our brothers and sisters, Indigenous brothers and sisters, to do a better design of our financial vehicles, so that we can then heal, build, and scale in a more healthy way. So that's what I can share, Tosh. That was really hard.
That was beautiful. It's a beautiful story, and it's just give folks a little bit of a taste of what Ruben's been working on. And one of the things he's working on right now is a collaboration with Conservation International. And if you know anything about like the conservation movement is a colonial construct that says we need to preserve nature, but in this construct of nature, there are no people in nature, right? Which means the Indigenous people who are in nature are erased, and their stewardship role has historically been erased by the conservation movement. So we're in a moment right now in which the conservation movement is recognizing what Ruben recognizes, like, oh, nature is not empty of human stewardship, which is why if you look at like the work of like, oh, hey, like, why is this forest so abundant, right? Because Indigenous people have been in partnership with nature, creating these food forests for thousands and thousands of years, right? And helping that ecosystem to evolve. Using fire practice, using all kinds of land care and stewardship practice. So there's a fundamental moment in which the lie of the conservation movement has been exposed, right? Indigenous people have always been actively participants in partnership with Mother Nature to help Mother Nature to thrive. And if we want to protect Mother Nature, as Ruben's saying, put resources in the hands of the people who know how to care for nature, right? And that is actually the smartest thing you can do with your resources if you want to have a world that works for everyone, right? So the conservation movement is like also recognizing this around the world in different ways. And they're like, okay, well, how do we get all this global climate commitment money, which is supposed to save the planet and climate, blah, 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 right? Well, you put it in the hands of Indigenous people. And so they've asked Ruben to design for them a strategy that will allow them to put a little bit of money in on the table that will unlock more money, which will unlock more money, which will unlock more money. And that, like putting a little money in that unlocks and unlocks and unlocks. The little secret thing here is we call it like the Ruben like Mapuche model, which is called the 51% model, right? 51% of it is in a colonial economic context is called two things: ownership and control. Where I used to come from, which is where David used to come from, is like, we want 100% community ownership and control from the beginning to the middle and the end. And I did that for a long time. And what I got was 100% control over a very small crumb. While the people who control everything were using the pie to destroy everything. So I was like, this is not working, because I need to get from the crumb to a slice to the majority of the pie back into the hands of the people who are stewards, who are caretakers, who are healers, who are going to grow, build, and repair ways of life and ways of living that have a future for us on the planet, as opposed to, Mother Nature goes on, but we've managed to just take ourselves out of the equation. She'll be fine without us. She will go on without us. But I would like to have my grandchildren's grandchildren, be a part of the party for a while longer. This is a miraculous, this little blue dot floating in the middle of the universe. As far as the farthest telescope can see, we have not found another blue dot like this one. It's miraculous that we are having this conversation, right? And the notion, the people who run things are like, we'll just go to Mars. We'll just colonize Mars. Like, we'll just burn this place to a crisp, and then we'll go terraform Mars. It's like, oh my goodness. First of all, if we can terraform Mars, we can terraform Earth, which means you can repair the harm that you've done with all of the technological power that you have. So let's just take care of this precious home. Yeah, so where was I? I'm lost in my ramblings here. But yes, 51%.
The whole pie.
The whole pie. Ownership and control. But what the 49% allows you to do is it allows you to bring in resources at a much larger scale, and then convert those resources and shift them back into Indigenous stewardship, shift them back into community ownership and control, shift them back into the commons at a much larger scale and faster. So that's part of the magic. But I'm gonna thank you for helping me out, Chad. I'm gonna pull in Chad, brother Chad, to share a little bit of your story of how you ended up in this crazy situation. And if you could just share a little about like your journey, where you came from. Chad is a musician, he's a dad, he's a capital activist, he's many things, but he's gone his own little journey, which has brought him into this little party here. So if you can share a little bit about kind of from the Midwest to Friendship House, like how did you
Sure,
get here?
yeah. I'm from Kansas, but I have to tell a quick story. I'm actually in Indiana visiting my best friend from high school, who's an English teacher. And so, and for various reasons, like I'm a character in the stories he tells his students. So like the fact that I was coming, they're very excited about, and they want to meet me. So I came to talk to students and basically talk to them about the stuff I do now. And just capital activism, I call it. And what the interesting anecdote is, and it's sort of maybe a glimmer of hope. I don't know. It's very interesting. So I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, and in the Q&A, one of the students asked me if I believe like we should destroy capitalism. It's like, well, what do you mean by capitalism? And in their conversation, they're an anarcho-communist, and they're also asked me if I thought like landlording should be legal. I know, so you like it. So anyway, I'm in Indiana, and like I'm getting asked about anarcho-communism by 18-year-olds. So I thought that's pretty cool. So yeah, I was born in Kansas, and then God, what's the short version of this? Traditional like upper middle class white generic background. I was not raised an activist. I was raised just a average white person who didn't know much about the way the world really was. I stayed that way for quite a long time. But I found my way to California. I went to school out here. I'll tell so a little bit of my path is kind of weird. So I went to Stanford. I studied philosophy, and then I decided I would try to be a musician and try. I want to be a rock star. So as I thought back on that a while ago, I was like, what are my parents thinking? Like, it's like the most white privileged thing I have ever heard. Is like, pay for you to go to Stanford, and then I'm trying to be a rock star, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. So completely aware of that. But the way that I paid for my glamorous wannabe rock star lifestyle is I was a nanny and a babysitter, and worked at a preschool. And through a bizarre series of events, the person at the preschool that worked on their technology, like IT stuff, like took me under their wing, and that's how I learned to do tech stuff. So like I went to preschool to learn how to be a techie when I was 25. And fast forward like 10 years later, I found myself as the chief information officer at a very prominent VC firm. I was not an investor, but I was like an operations techie person there. And over the past 10 years was gradually getting more and more uncomfortable with what I call my privilege to impact ratio, and didn't really guilty as I got more prosperity, but I was like, I had this nagging sense of like, there's gotta be some duty here. Like I don't, guilt doesn't really helpful, but I had this nagging sense of like, I have a role here. Like there's something I need to be doing something, and so there's a duty that came with it, but I wasn't sure what it was. And then over time, started researching what I knew I was going to do something else. I knew I was going to switch to something that's more like impact and directly trying to like be a part of the solution to the system that had brought me prosperity. Like, how could I wield my privilege in service of undoing the system that brought me that privilege in the first place? It was kind of like my goal, and realized that I wasn't going to figure that out unless I just quit. And so a couple years ago, I quit. So I'm a total newbie, and not totally, somewhat of a newbie to this world. And so I quit to figure out what it looked like to what my role is of somebody that checks every privilege box there is, and sort of trying to be part of healing. And so I think the thing that is, and came across and met Taj, and much gratitude for that. That's been a huge part of my path. And I think the key thing in terms of like how there's a lot of questions in the chat about like how do we like change banks, or how do we change economics to be, to decolonize, or how do we like switch it to this more healing form. And I think the thing that has been useful for me, and I think that one path is to change the sense of like what has value, and like in the unit of value. There's two things. The unit of value in capitalism is very individual. So like I'm trying to like get more money for me and my family, and like save it and give it to my descendants, and like it's very like this way. And I started, and my partners, we started thinking about like, well, like why are we accumulating more? And that's part of why I quit, because like I had made a bunch of money, honestly, and it's like, wait, I could stay here and like make a much more money, but like why? And little I know, and not no surprise, there's like some indigenous wisdom that is like behind that, even though I didn't know that's what it was. The Jeff Sear from Raven Indigenous Partners, I guess at a thing once said that, I guess it's an indigenous principle that if you have more than you need and you keep it, that's actually a mental illness. And so the idea of like enough is like, I think key to like undoing or reorienting the way we think about like how we use capital and money as medicine. Because right now there's in Western capitalist society, there is no such thing as enough, right? You accumulate up and to the right. That's like people's jobs are to make things, money, your money go up and to the right. but that doesn't actually make you happier, doesn't make you healthier, and actually harms a lot of people. And if our unit of value is not just like my, lineage, but if we think again in an indigenous mindset of like, I learned as I start to participate in indigenous spaces that you can't tell who's actually related to who. Everybody's auntie and everybody's cousin, everybody is related. We're all related, right? So if our unit of value, we expand like our aperture of like what matters to, as Taj was saying, people on the other side of the world even, then we would behave differently, right? We wouldn't like be accumulating I wouldn't be accumulating just for me or just for my kids. We would be thinking about how is what we're doing affecting like the much broader community. And so the idea of enoughness is just that like there is you can't have enough. Like there's an amount that is enough for you to thrive. And why accumulate? Our thought experiment is like why would you accumulate any more than that? And so instead, let's like return that, like have a reparations mindset. I mean, we should definitely look at all the capital, but like especially the money that you by definition don't need. And there's plenty of like people that have way more than they need. And how can we like as quickly as possible like return that to community ownership and control to the communities from which it was extracted originally, and like created that prosperity for these folks in the first place. So that's kind of like that's what I'm trying to figure out with Taj and Ben and now David, is like, how do we make that easy? How do we create easy buttons for people that are like teed up? So I think there's a lot of people that have money that are feeling some kind of way about I think I'm a good person, but I also like I have this prosperity, like what do I do? And just reducing the cognitive load of like, what is that thing that they do? Like, how do we actually return to community ownership and control? Like, in a really, really deep way, not through sort of traditional philanthropy that is reinforcing existing power structures, but for like new and different ways that actually is really empowering and putting capital into the hands of people that are solving the problems and are close to the problem. It's kind of like what we're trying to figure out. So, that's my spiel.
Taj, I want to jump in if that's okay, just because
Yeah, you do.
what
Yeah.
I've heard, right? So I want to actually bring into this conversation my mama. And so I see that I've got several folks here that know me, and y'all have heard me say this, and it's absolutely true. I am a proud and unapologetic mama's boy. I love my mama so much. I am so much of who I am because of my mama, and my papa, because even though I was born in poverty, y'all, I was bathed with love. Like my earliest memories were being cuddled, and like I'm tearing up because they made it clear to me that I was wanted. And not only that, but like, so there's a place in the world for me, and they taught me I have gifts, and they said, and here's how you offer them properly. So like you, Chad, I didn't come out of activism at all. Like I was 20 years old before I ever saw something called an activist. It was quite exotic. But my point is, even in poverty, so much love. And so like, I didn't even know it, but then, and so I used to not talk about like, I know what it's like to carry a 5-gallon bucket of my family's excrement at the end of the day. And I used to never talk about that until I went through therapy. And frankly, Marxism helped me to understand it wasn't my parents' fault. Like I had all this really messed up stuff, like just toxic stuff that Taj talked about. But one of the things that mama did teach me was, son, money really doesn't matter as long as you have enough for what you need. And if you don't, then money will become the only thing that matters. And oh my goodness, y'all. So really the question is, all right, well, what do I really need? And what I've figured out is, actually, you don't need a whole lot of money, really, right? And then I now want to bring in another teacher, Michelle Vassell, the WIOT tribal administrator, who says, look, David, money is just the thing that we do to help facilitate the things that we're doing. It's the things that we're doing that matters. And what we're doing is praying with our hands. And that's why, Taj, I don't know if I've shared this with you and Ruben yet, but the fund that, like, again, we're creating the Dishkama Community Land Trust as one vehicle. So you got to do stuff, right? But this conversation is way deeper than that we're having now. But one of the things that we're creating, are you ready, Ruben? Because you're like, I know you've got the fund of funds, and you've been pushing me we got to get to a fund. And I'm like, I'm pedaling as fast as I can. The fund that we're creating to do the work only in Wiyot ancestral territories. Gauts, Lakual, Hiwachek. Money that makes us well. I mean, isn't it so beautiful that without even knowing it, like we're literally talking about money as energy and money as literally money as medicine. I'm tearing up right now because of my own acknowledgement of, and you know what, I'm also pretty angry to have been born into a society that that so confused me, right? Like this is like, we are connected. I mean, I'm here to tell you these three men are my brothers. Like, I feel so much love and appreciation for the journey. And I know I'm making mistakes, but I'm doing my best. And as I make a mistake, I try to correct it. What does Maya Angelou teaches us, right? Like, do the best that you can. And when you know better,
you do better.
That's it.
Yes.
I just wanted to share that part.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think the most embarrassing thing that I ever done in my life probably is I quoted myself on my website. But I quoted other people too, but I just like, oh my God.
Can I just highlight one thing about like money as a tool, or like inherent money stuff? So like, I think it's obvious to everybody, but like there's nothing good or bad about money. I think it's a tool, and then some of the chat was like, we're not elevating money as like having inherent value. It's just a tool that we have like in our current world. And so I don't know, I think that's just important to note. And if we in fact had a truly if we all really believe that the community was the unit of value, and we truly had reciprocal relationship with everybody, we may not need it, right? That might go away. Like if you like wave a magic wand and create the society you want, like we might not have like, maybe there won't be many who would need it because everybody would be helping each other where they needed it, like, and sort of, and I think there's communities that actually are like manifesting that. But anyway, I just want to say that like money isn't for money. Money doesn't matter for anything. It just happens to be like the tool that we have, and it is what sort of enables us to create transformation out of the mess that we're in.
Yeah, I think a big motivation for shifting stewardship of land, labor, capital, and creativity into the hands of stewards and caretakers is it moves us back into the commons and back into a situation where the more community you have and the more nature you're in relationship to, the less money you need. So we are trying to get our hands on as much money as we can so that the importance of money itself diminishes. Because when we get our hands on money, we turn that money into care, into healing, into stewardship, into community, and into the restoration of our relationship with nature. So that's why we want it, to make it irrelevant. Because when the colonial nation states collapse around the world in the next 50 to 100 years, which they will, we will all find ourselves back in this question of like, how are we in community? How are we in relationship? How are we, do we know how to care for each other, right? And the land when these extractive systems have completely exhausted themselves, which they are rapidly doing. So, and this is the work of navigating transition. It's that you have simultaneously have one foot planted in the existing and extractive system and one foot planted in the future that we're building, and the vision that we're building. And you have to have one foot planted in each side so that you can draw the energy out and up and bring the energy down, and draw it up and bring it down, and draw it up and bring it down, right? If you don't engage it, you can't transform it, right? Like, so some of the questions in the chat that have to do with like, how do you do this and how do you do that and how do you do this? Another way to think about this is we are reverse engineering our way back, right? Out of the system we have to ways of living and organizing that are more regenerative and sustainable and rooted in Indigenous wisdom. So before the corporation was invented, there was a thing called the trust. Trusts existed as a legal entity pre-corporation. So why are we focused on Indigenous land trusts and community land trusts and capital land trusts and revolving loan funds? Because trusts are a mechanism for collective stewardship and ownership of our shared resources. They facilitate that in the way that cooperatives do, in the way that Indigenous and tribal government does, right? That there are forms of governance that better support collective stewardship and collective care. So a trust is moving away from certain structures to other structures, is a way to start to go back to what worked, right? But in order to do that, you have to have all of the structures to take water from this cup and pour it from this cup to this cup, and take the water from this cup and pour it from this cup to this cup, and take it from this cup and pour it from this cup to this cup. It's not about the cups, it's about who's holding the cups. Because the same tools that, we call them capital stewards. My friend Farhad from the Chorus Foundation, who is himself a capital steward, he says, Taj, we are not capital stewards. We are wealth hoarders. Do not call us capital stewards. We are wealth hoarders. And I'm saying, okay, Farhad, you can call yourself a wealth hoarder. I will call you a capital steward. And I'm glad that the Chorus Foundation has transferred assets into communities for their own governance and control, and that you have divested yourself of the wealth that was passed to you intergenerationally, and now you are no longer a capital steward because you got rid of it as quickly as you could and you gave it back to communities. That's great. Everyone should be like you. Not everyone is going to be like you, but I wish everyone was like you. But in order to effectuate this transition at scale, all of the mechanisms that capital stewards, or as Farhad would call them, wealth hoarders, have used to concentrate and hoard wealth. If we want to rapidly make an economic transition, we are trying to put all of those tools in the hands of communities and tribes and Indigenous people and people for whose land, labor, and capital has been extracted, so that you can use those same tools for the purposes of community wealth building. Right? The tool itself is not, just like the capital itself, it's not necessarily harmful or reparative. It's not necessarily extractive or regenerative. It's like a hammer is a hammer. In whose hands that hammer rests is what matters. A lightsaber is a lightsaber, right? For those Star Wars fans out there, right? The Force is the Force. For what purpose? In whose benefit? In relationship to domination or a relationship to cooperation, care, and repair? What are the values infused into that structure? What are the values infused into that dollar? What are the values infused into that agreement? Right? That's what matters. And we sometimes have this tendency to think, oh, I just have to find the right tool. And there's good tools and there's bad tools, and there's good structures and there's bad structures. And it should be a nonprofit, or should be a cooperative, or should be a trust, or like, if I can just find the perfect tool, then that will ensure our values are preserved. That's not actually how things work. All kinds of horrible things happen to people inside of the good structures, unfortunately. They will not save us. They will not protect us. What protects us and saves us is, are we listening to the water? Did you listen to your grandmama? Are you in right relationship with yourself and other living beings? There is no protection other than that. And that is a collective and collaborative endeavor. That is the work of culture and community. And that is fundamentally our shared human construct. And yeah, okay. There are questions in the chat. There are questions in a document. There are questions going here, there, and everywhere. And we've got some time. So anyone who's following the chat, following the questions, reading the questions, want to like respond to some of the other things that have been shared, or invite in some wisdom from everyone who's the 82 people who are wild enough.
Let's be honest, they're watching a conversation, and it's a fishbowl, right? So Ruben, it looks like you came off chat. I'll invite you, and then I'm looking at a couple of questions that I want to address as well, but I'll go after you.
Oh, I was just there's a lot of questions around the, how do you change the current institutions, and a lot of it in our learnings from our limited experience working as full spectrum capital partners and Good Life Pledge. What we're coming to learn is that the extreme innovation, that's a term that I learned in when I was up in Montreal this past year for the COP biodiversity negotiations. All these banks and hedge funds, insurance companies too. There's the other player that really understands futures. The insurance companies and the insurance industry understands that we are destroying our planet, and they are really struggling to figure out how to not go broke, because they're the only one. They're the ones. The insurance industry is the one that really understands, and the reinsurance industry is the other one that really understands from a financial perspective the magnitude of the loss that they're going to have because of climate change and because of biodiversity loss. And they call these things, they use the term extreme innovations. We're looking for extreme innovations. So I went up there and I talked to all these, European reinsurance banks. And so we know the extreme innovation is to have Indigenous people to own all your companies, to be part owners of your companies, to be part of the governance, to be part of the trust that you've all created. The monarchies, and the monarchies have all this structures of trust, basically created all this trust to ensure that their lineage, survives and has enough money to continue to serve their subjects. And the trust law is actually really, really well developed. And there's this big extreme innovation that I mentioned to the reinsurance companies. Just make the trust, the beneficiaries of the trust, to be the earth, or to be the unborn people that have not been here yet. So our conversations are going to be very different when it comes to where the trust is going to invest, because a trust as a legal structure is essentially a vehicle to park money. You could just park assets and money, and from that trust you can reinvest it, you can waste it, you can spend it, you can do whatever the trustee decides to do with that trust on behalf of the beneficiaries. And if the beneficiaries continue to be our own, sort of like our family members, our kids, our grandkids, and forget about the rest of the world, or forget about the earth, then we're not using that tool in the way that we could be using it, that will create our relation or make our relationships be deeper, more meaningful, and more thinking about the common goal. The common goal is, well, we have this earth for the ones who are not here yet, and for the earth itself. So I just wanted to share that there's a very radical and extreme innovation, and I just make fun of that because it's not that extreme. It's just pretty simple, straightforward thing.
So just to name the principle and what you're saying, Ruben, like our friend Kat Taylor, who you'll read about if you kind of go in and look at the Good Life Pledge campaign we're looking at. She has a couple catchphrases that she likes to say. It's time to put new and different people in charge, because the people who've been in charge have kind of ruined everything, which is like, oh, let's put different people in charge, right? Which is like shifting governance of key stewardship questions. And the other thing she said is, if everybody owns a little bit of everything and nobody owns too much of anything, that's how we get to the good life. Meaning, the central question is the question of ownership. And if you democratize ownership of everything, right? And democratizing ownership of everything as a shift towards affirming our collective stewardship and responsibility, right? So ownership is a bridge to stewardship. And a good many of my good friends who are Hawaiians. They will tell you that, and they will share stories about they may have lost political governance as a people over their homelands, but they have never abandoned their responsibility to be stewards. And their stewardship responsibility and the question of colonial control and ownership are separate questions, right? You can always be a steward. You can always claim your unrelinquished sovereignty and assert your responsibility to care for that which you have responsibility to care for. That is separate from what the state does or does not do, separate from whether your stewardship responsibility and your sovereignty are acknowledged or affirmed by colonial powers or not, right? So this question of democratization of ownership has a very specific relationship to our sacred responsibility as stewards. And we all have a sacred responsibility as stewards. And that is an understanding what our particular sacred responsibility is core to this re-indigenizing, remembering, decolonizing work that all of us have to do, that not just those who are Indigenous people in their homelands, caring for that. It is work for all of us. It is work for all of us.
Thank you, Taj. It's important to remember, y'all, that I'll say it like this. I descend from Indigenous people. And guess what? So do you. And by you, I mean whoever occupies the seat in which you're sitting, right? Like literally every human being descends from Indigenous people who were once in right relationship somewhere on Earth. And we've been disrupted from that. And this is why, like, all empires suck. Now, I personally have a special hatred of the English Empire, not English people, but the English Empire, because I know that's the empire that traumatized my ancestors, pushed them off of the land that they were in right relationship with, in a reciprocal relationship. And then my ancestors came here and traumatized people on this continent, Turtle Island. And so there's trauma to go around. But I think it's worth pointing out that everything that I'm hearing from this conversation and the journey that I'm on is I literally am rethinking money, right? Like I used to think that we just needed to get enough money to do the kind of work that we did. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, we need the tools, right? Because money is just a tool, right? And but it's so much deeper than that, right? Like because it's a worldview. Do you know that in the Australian Aboriginal language, they literally didn't have words for please and thank you? Do you know why? Because it was an expectation that if Taj needed something, that it would be provided. And then if I needed something and Chad could help me, it would be provided. I didn't have to beg for it or to be appropriately grateful for it. It was literally the relationship that humans had to each other is because we were, in fact, loving each other and in proper relationship. So to me, the question is, how do we change the story, right? It's not the story of the battle. It's the battle for the story. Like we are actually in this incredible moment. Like I say to folks right now, congratulations and condolences for being a human being at this point on planet Earth. Like, wow, like how incredibly frightening and exciting it is. And I'm going to do this. This has been so poetic and much of a metaphor, but as a storyteller, let me share with you how I, in a pool hall or a bowling alley, would try to actually say, okay, here's how I think that we can navigate this moment. And it'll go like this. I think that what we need is to make sure that the land, and here in Wiyot ancestral territory, who have been here since time immemorial, they know how to be here and they can teach us how to be here. But what we need land, not as a commodity to buy and sell it, but we need a place to live, and we need to ensure that we are producing food that we have enough to live on. So, all right, so we need land and access to land to both live on it and also to produce food. And we need to do it in a way that can ensure that our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren can be here. So land for housing and for food production and distribution. And we need to create businesses that will thrive and survive and make sure that we can do commerce, but also to teach each other how to cooperate better, right? So we need some sort of business to do that, worker-owned cooperatives. So we need something like that. And then, though, we need to be thinking about how to get in front of this new technology around digital fabrication and laser printing and all of this stuff. So what if we actually had a community process where we said, this is what people need for the things that we're going to make, and then we democratize or decolonize the production of food and distribution models, so food sovereignty. And then we had the same thing with land and housing. And then we created worker-owned cooperatives for commerce. And then we ensured that on the digital fabrication tip, this is the community deciding the things that we actually need, and they're sourced very locally from the local feedstock. And then lastly, we ensured that all of this was done with art and culture and dancing and poetry, and that everybody is actually celebrating each other. And that, my friends, is what myself and Kamal Franklin and Egget Batru from Community Movement Builders in Atlanta, and my good friend Blair Evans from Idlewild, Black Eden in Michigan is doing, what Cooperation Jackson is doing. Like, there's a group of us, and I'm trying to do here in Humboldt with the Wiyot tribe. What we're trying to do is say, we're going to create experiments that actually show, not tell, show this is what it looks like to actually do this. And look how much fun we're having. Look at our dance. And we're just trying to invite people into the joyous dance that we're doing. So that, and I'll use that, Taj. That's my sort of concluding effort to the conversation, because I'm now looking at the time.
Yeah, I just thank you for that. And it's a joy to be in the dance with you and with the Wiyot people and with the cooperators in the communities that you're a part of, who spend a lot of time thinking about this and spend a lot of time over many years creating experiments and efforts, and who are now trying to think about how to take all those lessons and kind of bring it to the scale of the need, right? It's like, if we have this many people who are unhoused or securely housed, we've been satisfied for too long saying, like, okay, all I can figure out is how to, provide a solution for 1 out of the 10 people, right? And if we say, okay, we're the ones who have a transformational belief that another world is possible, it's not okay for us to not have a strategy that has some potential of meeting the actual need. That is our responsibility as revolutionaries, as transformational people. If we are true in that, we have to take on responsibility for the challenge in its fullness, right? And each of us has to do a small part. That doesn't mean I'm responsible for everything. I'm a very tiny drop in a very big ocean. I'm the universe tells me every day how small I am relative to the problems I'm trying to solve. But many hands make for light work. I just have to carry my little part. There's sort of the cooperative spirit is essential here, in that there's something that each of us can do. And if we all find the thing that we can do, and we do it together and joyfully and respectfully and lovingly, like, all of the problems we can solve, they are all solvable together, working together, building together, growing together, healing together. And just there's so much sophistication I'm seeing and nuance in all of the comments and like everything that on this call is sharing. And I just want to go back and heart everything that I'm saying there, because the thing I want to affirm that I'm getting out of it, looking in the comments, is you all are naming like the nuance, the complexity, the contradictions in this messy roll up your sleeves work. And I think what I want to invite you all to do is invite us in to the places where you have sacred responsibility, places where you're like, hey, I've got people who need to eat. I've got people who need a safe place to sleep. I've got people who need their cultural and political rights respected. And I have a responsibility to that. Help us figure out how to do that. And then Because that's where, in my experience, we can joyfully navigate the contradictions at the sight of our responsibility, and by rolling up our sleeves and just trying it and seeing if it works, right? With an understanding that we have to keep trying until we find a solution that works. We do not have the luxury to sit back and say, I don't like that idea. I don't like that idea. I don't like, because our people are hungry. And if we don't figure it out, they will continue to suffer, right? So one of the reasons why I love you, David, is that is who you are, and that's who you've always been, and that's who you always be. And that is what we call a community steward. Someone who holds sacred responsibility for the care and well-being of their people and their place. And if you are a community steward, if that is who you are, we want to be in relationship with you. We want to support you. We want to help you hold that responsibility that you hold, and we want to hold it with you, right? Ruben, unmute.
Does David showed this common solar project, or solar commons project?
Yes.
That you there.
I'll just really quickly, Ruben. Oh, you know about it already.
Then, yes, but I think what was important is not just about the individual project, is the approach to get to that. It's just how can we, all of us, learn the approaches to trust, ownership, control, management, that are democratizing, are that we are in relationship, in right relationship. So approaches is what really can be scaled. And that's what I learned from my Mapuche brothers and sisters, is learning not about the individual solutions, but learning the approach to how you got to the solution, which is really more important, because the end result could be worker co-ops, or could be a venture capital fund. It doesn't, it's independent of that. It's more of the approach on how everyone got together who has the problem. What was the approach to get to the decision to that one solution, right? And I think that's behind is what in venture capital and private equity investment and all the investment really industries, they talk about the money behind the money, and the money behind the money are the people talking about how to bring the money in. So I think that's where communities have the power, because the money behind the money and everything is our indigenous communities, all of us. We are behind the money. We are the ones who decide how the solutions get out there. Right now, we're letting the vehicles, venture capital, private equity, it doesn't matter what the vehicle is, we're letting that set the tone of what the solutions are going to be. So I just want to bring that into perspective, that if a community decides to have a trust, is how what was the approach to create a trust? If a community decides to have a venture capital fund, what was the process for them to get to that decision or that solution? So I think, and we talk about this a lot in Full Spectrum, is how do we scale processes? How do we scale, approaches, as opposed to scaling individual solutions?
Yeah, that is the way. For those Mandalorian fans out there, this is
Yes.
the way. This is the way. The relational way to be a good relative, to be a good steward, to be deeply humble, right? And as one of our friends reminded, yes, I am a drop in the ocean, and I am an ocean in a drop, right? Which is, again, the power of the poetry to help to reveal the paradox of reality. We are both small, and we are everything, and you are everything, and everything is you. So yes, that is sort of thinking about building a being rooted in wisdom cultures. You can think about why Indigenous peoples are so important for all of us to be in relationship, because there's a sense of a connection to deep wisdom. And what does it mean to have our approach be a wisdom-centered approach? Yeah, that would be very different than the dominant system that we're in that is collapsing. Yeah.
So Taj, I know that you and I both share a commitment to dismantling oppressive systems and structures. And one of the most challenging and most oppressive is the space-time continuum. And I regret to share that we really do have to wrap this one up as much as you, and like I hope y'all have all been as enriched and nourished by this conversation. But I feel like I've already had my opportunity to close, but I do feel like we should do a go round because we have another session that's coming up, and I hope folks come to labor organizing and the higher education roundtable that's coming up. But I do want to give maybe Chad, then Ruben, and then Taj the final word, maybe in that order, to hear final thoughts.
Ooh, I'm bad short-term memory. Am I first? Okay. Just gratitude for y'all having me, and I think one final observation from stuff in the chat in terms of, is it just ownership, and ownership isn't sufficient, and ownership maybe is a colonial concept. Like, I think is ownership just management of assets, like decisions about assets? If we're calling that ownership, I think we still need assets exist, and people have to make decisions about them somehow. So there will be decisions about assets. If you don't want to call it ownership, great. And who is making those decisions really, really, really matters. Like, different outcomes happen when people make decisions who feel accountable to community and to the earth than people who don't, like the current people that have control of the assets. So I do really think we do need all of the things. It's not just like, it's not simple, but I do think it really matters who has control of the assets. If those people feel accountable to each other and community and to the earth, we will have different outcomes.
Ditto. Beneficiaries, who are we doing this for? I would add to that, to what Chad just said. Tosh?
Yes. Remembering who we are. So the beautiful thing about this process is this is a journey back to ourselves. It is a process of remembering who we've always been, and just being true to that, like who we are in our beautiful collectivity, in our just precious individuality, right? Like, each of us this place is so unique in the universe, and each of us are a unique expression of this unique place in the universe. And we are one, and we are many, and we are one. That is the truth of who we are. And if we can recognize that and honor that and acknowledge that in ourselves and each other, yeah, we have a thriving future awaiting us in the present. Because that's the other time travel trick, right? The time travel trick in the eternal now is to embody the vision we want in the future, in this very moment, in this very offering, in this very gesture, in this very act, right? That we can bring that future alive now. And if we can do that, if we can bring the future into the present in that way, then yeah, here we are. The party begins. The celebration continues. And just excited for all of the other conversations that are happening in this gathering. And thanks to you, David, and the broader community of leaders and stewards who are bringing us all together, and just really, really grateful to be in circle and community with all of you. To be continued.
Joaksh.